Hello. I think many of you may know me. I'm Reverend Dr. Elise. Today's Thursday, the 26th of June, 2025. Today is day 629. Thank you for all of you who are supporting my Ironman efforts. I was actually going to start with that. Our goal is to raise $140,600 because that's how many miles the Ironman is. So the goal is $1,000 for each mile. Many of you have made donations. That's happening on the 20th of September. We're at 5% of that goal. So thank you so much for that support. I actually wanted to start with Gaza, and that's the main motivation for why I'm doing 140.6 miles. And Gaza has not been in the news much at all. And the realities there in the terms of the humanitarian crisis are getting worse and worse. And when people are seeking aid, they're getting killed. And so over the weekend, it was announced that 44 Palestinians were killed in Gaza. The UN also warned of a water shortage. 44 people were killed while seeking food on one day. And the UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, said that there was a shortage of fuel, which means wells are not able to be operated. Desalination plants have had to shut down. And so what's happening is being considered a man-made drought. On Friday, Israeli forces last week killed at least 12 Palestinians that were waiting for aid. I don't know of a day that we have heard. I don't know of a day that has happened where there have not been reports of deaths, where there have not been reports of people killed. I think it's happening every day. And many of those deaths are happening right near the distribution sites of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is funded by the US. Just this week, the US committed $30 million under what's called a priority directive from the White House and the State Department. Reuters reported that. Aid agencies and international advocates are calling the humanitarian distribution centers death traps. And the war is increasingly being described as a war on civilians. Yesterday, at least 46 people, so this was Wednesday, 46 people were killed by Israeli fire in two different incidents in central and South Gaza. Rescuers and local hospitals say, and this was related to the food distribution system. I've heard that there still are only 4 distribution sites open, and when the GHF is fully functional, it will only serve 600,000 of the 2.3 million people in Gaza. Over the weekend, the bodies of 3 hostages who had been killed on October 7th were recovered, including an IDF soldier and 2 civilians. This happened on Saturday. Israel rejected a report that came out this past week from the European Union saying it may breach human rights obligations in Gaza and the West Bank, and Israel disagreed. The report was sent to EU officials ahead of a foreign ministers meeting that happened. On June 20th, I wanted to call to your attention, it was World Refugee Day, which is, of course, all the more relevant as we're witnessing the trauma being inflicted on internally displaced people, the refugees from Gaza. There are tens of thousands of refugees who are from Gaza in Egypt and other Arab countries. And June 20th, World Refugee Day, reminds us of the strength and resilience and the hope of the millions who've been forced to flee their homes because of conflict, persecution, and disaster. I wanted to shift. Of course, the world is paying attention to what is happening related to Iran. And I wanted to summarize the US attacks on Iran and talk about what happened with Israel and Iran this past week. Last week, we heard President Trump say he was going to take 2 weeks to decide whether or not to respond to Netanyahu's request to support Israel's war on Iran. We're learning now that was all a charade. He knew when he said that he was going to attack. It was a deliberate deception. Trump had already made the decision to drop the bombs on Iran when he left the G7 meetings in Canada. He said that he was leaving not to broker a Middle East ceasefire. He said he was leaving for something much bigger, and he said, stay tuned. Now, I even gave that update in a daily update, but I didn't catch what was happening in that regard. The U.S. bombed Iran in the early morning hours on Sunday. strike details were that an official said there were 6 B-2 bombers that were dropped. There were a dozen what are called bunker buster bombs. These are 30,000-pound bombs. They were dropped on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, the Fordo nuclear site, which lies deep underground. Navy submarines also fired 30 T-LAM cruise missiles at Natanz and other nuclear sites in Isfahan. And 1 B-2 bomber also dropped 2 bunker busters on Natanz. B-2 busters are the only plane that is capable of carrying this heavy of a bomb. And my understanding is Israel certainly doesn't have the capability to do this. So they needed the US to be able to bomb these facilities. Now, the US strikes on Iran were described by Trump when he addressed the nation on Sunday night. I watched this live. He was flanked by VP Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, Secretary of Defense Hegseth. Trump announced that the US successfully hit all 3 nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan. And Trump said that it was successful. The American B-2 bombers were used. He said there will be peace or a far greater tragedy for Iran. He said, tonight I can report to the world the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Those were his public remarks. Now, Netanyahu said, congratulations, your bold decisions were awesome. It shows the righteous might of the US. This is going to change history. And he said, President Trump and I often say peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. Just for the record, that's quite different than what Jesus says. But anyway, he said, tonight, President Trump and the US acted with a lot of strength. As that was happening, right when these attacks were happening, this was, the Israel-Iran conflict had entered its 2nd week. On Saturday, prior to this happening, Israel had claimed the killing of 2 commanders in the Iran's elite Quds force. It said they struck a range of Iranian military targets. So 2 weeks of Israel and Iran going back to back with missiles. 2 Iranian drones had breached Israel's air defenses before the US attacks. And then according to the New York Times, inside the Pentagon and the US Central Command, military planners worried that Trump had given Iran too much warning, because of this whole, announcement he made when he was leaving the G7. So there was this whole other subterfuge, which I thought was quite interesting. So I'm going to tell you about it. You might have heard about the fleets. I think I even gave the daily update where the fleets of B-2 bombers left Missouri, and there were fleets that went west. And I kept thinking, why are they going to Guam? So they were going to Guam. Well, while that group was going to Guam and that was reported, there was a whole nother group that was going eastbound that wasn't reported. And those were the bombers that were used in the actual bombing. So it was 2:10 a.m. And the reason the Pentagon and US Central Command did that subterfuge was because Trump had been so verbose. So that was part of what happened. On Monday, Iranian nuclear sites sustained with severe damage. That's what was reported. General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said there was severe damage, etc. The mission, it was clarified, was not about regime change. It was only about the nuclear forces, etc. In days before this happened, Iran had sent a private message to President Trump saying Tehran would respond to an attack by unleashing terrorist attacks on US soil by mobilizing sleeper cells operating inside the country. And there were all kinds of reports about this. Sleeper cells inside the country and around the world to attack US assets. The threat of sleeper cells, this was a report from the US Customs and Border Protection, sympathizers acting on their own and formal sleeper cells at the behest of Iran has never been higher. Things got so bad, I told my husband, we live on Capitol Hill, that we shouldn't be on Capitol Hill during the 4th of July. Like, that's how bad things were in terms of the reports, prior to the US attacks. Now, in the days before Trump's final order, that was being heavily reported. Then we found out all of Trump's reports about the nuclear capabilities of Iran being destroyed seemed to be not true. The US military strikes on the 3 nuclear facilities did not destroy Iran's nuclear program, and they likely only set it back by a few months. So there was a report that was leaked that said this, an intelligence report. The assessment by the Pentagon's intelligence arm is completely at odds with what we're hearing from President Trump. I don't know how many of you heard this, but like, it was unbelievable what Trump said, what the actual reports that were leaked said. It was like Trump was saying it was a severe obliteration, and the report was saying, it might have caused a little bit of damage. I mean, it was such a complete, I'm taking too long to tell this story. I'm sorry, I'll go faster. Anyway, this leaked report was a huge issue this week. Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, said that it was a preliminary report. There wasn't a lot of confidence in it, that there was a political motive behind it, that it wasn't true. There was also this crisis we heard about, with before on the plane, where somebody else in the administration said that Iran wasn't working on a bomb, and Trump said that they were wrong. I mean, so the senior leaders in the Trump administration are really, like, their ducks are not quite in a row. Rubio said that Iran was much further away from a nuclear weapon than they were before the president took this bold action, trying to back up Trump, saying it was so successful. Okay, anyway, the US administration kept saying the goal was nuclear facilities to be destroyed, not a regime change. But even on the issue of regime change, some of the leaders said, it would be a really good thing. And Trump said, no, we don't want that. We want to keep everything as calm as possible. Iranians are good traders. They're good business people. They have a lot of oil. They'd be fine. They should be able to rebuild and do a good job. They're never going to have nuclear, but other than that, they should do a good job. I'm exhausted. This is only like Tuesday. I haven't even gotten to like Wednesday through Friday yet. On Wednesday, CIA said that their intelligence indicated that Iran nuclear program was severely damaged. So this came out yesterday. And I'm like, is this the CIA that supports Trump, or is this the CIA that had the intelligence report that was leaked? Trump said on his way to NATO yesterday, he hit back at that initial report and said, yes, the nuclear program was obliterated. The CIA director, Ratcliffe, said there was credible intelligence that the nuclear program was severely damaged. So honestly, I don't know. A senior Iranian commander was one of the orchestrators of the Hamas attacks, was killed in Iran. Iran should not try to rebuild their nuclear program after the U.S. strikes, Trump said today at the NATO summit. I think that was yesterday. Late last week, an Iranian missile damaged one of Israel's largest hospitals. Around 80 people were injured. CMEP is quoted in a lot of far-right media actually as condemning that attack. We're one of the only international aid agencies that condemned that attack on Israel's hospital. And we actually, the quote I sent talked about the 700 plus attacks on Gaza hospitals, the more than 1,500 health workers and 460 aid workers who've been killed in Gaza since October 7th. So we totally condemned the attack on the Israeli hospital, and then condemned all the attacks on the hospitals in Gaza as well. And so we were picked up by a number of very far-right outlets. But we were called anti-Israel because we highlighted Gaza while we condemned the attack on the Israeli hospital. Now, on Monday, the IDF launched an unprecedentedly powerful strike against Iran. And then there was the ceasefire. So let's get to the ceasefire. Throughout the weekend until Sunday, Israel and Iran continued to exchange fire. I'm sorry, there's been stuff going on with my family, and I'm like, did I even talk about the attack on the U.S. Yet? Am I out of order? Like, I'll just keep going through my notes. So there was a ceasefire. There was a ceasefire, and the U.S. was attacked. Have I talked about that first? Did I get my notes out of order? I'm so sorry. Okay, I'll keep going. They might be out of order. I apologize. Anyway, on Sunday, so throughout the weekend until Sunday, there was an exchange of missiles between Israel and Iran. That continued until 9 p.m. The ceasefire is holding. This is current. This is current. It's very, very tenuous. But there has been slight breaches of the ceasefire, and Trump actually got really mad at Israel this week. Trump showed anger Tuesday morning. He was very critical of both Iran and Israel, but he reserved his harshest criticism for Israel, whom he said unloaded on Iran as soon as we made the deal. Iranians and Israelis were working to get back to normal on Wednesday. So that's one of the things that happened. Prior to the ceasefire, it was reported that Iran's parliament had endorsed the closure of the Hormuz Strait, a key waterway that around 20% of the world's oil and gas shipments pass through. Under pressure from Trump, Netanyahu significantly reduced a planned retaliation against Iran's breach of the ceasefire agreement. There was a report this last week that 3 people who were reportedly Mossad spies had smuggled equipment into Iran and they were executed just yesterday. Now, I thought these were actually Jewish spies, is what I thought. Now, what this really is this is the Iranian regime seemingly being despotic. And anyone who opposes the Iranian regime, they're accused of being Jewish spies or Zionists or Israeli spies, and then they're killed. So 700 people have been arrested because they're accused of being, pro-Israel or being Zionists. And so Amnesty International raised the alarm and said, these killings, these are extrajudicial killings that are happening in Iran. I'm hoping that we at CMEP do a statement about that. That was just Amnesty highlighted it. That just happened in the last couple of days. Since the Iran and Israel attacks, there have been more than 600 people killed. In Iran on Tuesday, since the ceasefire was announced, there were 4 people killed in Israel in a residential. Israel carried out a targeted killing of a scientist. There have been numerous scientists that were killed. Meanwhile, in Israel, the Middle East Eye reported that Palestinian citizens of Israel have been denied the protection of shelters by some of their Israeli Jewish neighbors. See, this is where I'm like, I think the order is out. I'm sorry, I can't put it together. I said, then Iran attacked a U.S. base in Qatar in retaliation. So I apologize for the order. You'll have to look at the dates of what day of the week different things happened. But there was a retaliatory attack. The U.S. attacked the Iranian nuclear sites, and then I don't know where the ceasefire fits in, is what I'm saying off the top of my head. But then Iran retaliated against us. And I want to talk about that. When they retaliated against us, they attacked a U.S. base in Qatar. They were sending a clear and explicit message to Washington. The base is where the U.S. command is located. So it's a very, very, very important base. But guess what? Iran told the U.S. they were going to do it in back channels before they did it. So they also, I presume, told Qatar. So all the missiles, there were 14 Iranian missiles that were fired at the U.S. in retaliation. Qatar knocked them out of the sky. So all of this is war games. Like all of this retaliation, this was not a retaliation. Iran does not want to go to war with the United States, but they had to retaliate. So this whole idea that Iran was counterattacking the U.S., yes, they were, but they told us they were going to. And then Qatar, Qatar knocked them out of the sky. The embassy was closed for 3 hours when this happened. Like after 3 hours, it reopened. So in the US, we're like, oh, we were attacked. But just for you to know, I mean, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. I'm not saying it's not a big deal. I just want you to know that like the attack was thwarted, but all of this was orchestrated behind the scenes. Okay, I have to move a little bit quicker. I'm sorry, my update this week is very unorganized. Both Qatari and U.S. officials said that nearly all of the missiles were intercepted. Trump called the Iranian attack very weak. He thanked the Iranian officials for giving the U.S. early notice on the attack. He thanked Iranian officials who attacked us for giving the U.S. notice. Okay. Iranian officials confirmed that they gave notice, that they wanted to minimize casualties. In other words, Iran saying, hey, U.S., we don't want to go to war with you. Now, Iran, in Arabic, I'm sure, is saying different things to their people. They're like, hey, look, we were really tough. We fired 14 missiles at the U.S., right? Like, okay, this is like very, very unprofessional interpretation, my weekly update here today. But the main point is Iran does not want to go to the war with the U.S. Qatar not only thwarted the attack, they intervened on behalf of Trump with the administration. Qatar is the one that persuaded Iran to agree with the ceasefire deal with Israel. So I think that the attack happened before the ceasefire deal, and I just put it out of order. I'm sorry, I'm quite tired today. Yesterday at the NATO summit, Trump compared the conflict between Israel and Iran to two kids in a schoolyard. Trump said a very bad word that I said in my daily update when he was talking about the two of them. And the NATO secretary today said, then daddy has to use some strong language, to get the kids back in order. So there was a lot of conversation about that in the international scheme. Ali Shadmani, who was the top military commander in Iran, it was confirmed that he did die after airstrikes. In Israel on Wednesday, there were 7 Israeli soldiers who were killed in Khan Yunis. I wanted to let you know, in Lebanon, in the middle of all of this, Israel fired in South Lebanon on Hezbollah targets. I'm like, how did you have time to do this? So that happened this week. And then there was a coup attempt in Armenia. And the person who attempted the coup is a bishop in the Armenian church, an archbishop. So Archbishop Bagrat Galstanyan of the Armenian National Church was arrested on charges of attempting a coup. And if you don't know about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, we did a 3-part mini course on Armenia. Armenia is the oldest Christian country in the world. There's a former ambassador to Armenia who's a part of the mini series. This is on our resource pages. I would really, really encourage you to watch that. It is still so relevant. So this archbishop gained media attention last year. He organized a protest march where he wanted the resignation of the president. He marched from a border village whose land was given away from Pashinyan, the president, to Azerbaijan. He marched from that village, and as he marched, several thousand people joined him, and he was arrested just this week for a conspiracy to plan a coup. The Armenian government claims his group, which is called the Holy Struggle, recruited thousands of people to create chaos and unrest within Armenia. We're launching an Armenian Advisory Council. The Armenian Orthodox Apostolic Church sits on our board. If you're on our mailing list, are welcome to join us. It'll be a very prestigious event in New York City on September 16th. It was originally the 17th. It's now the 16th at the Cathedral in New York City. It'll be a ticketed dinner. It'll be a gala with bishops, Armenian food, culture, etc. So mark your calendars in that regard. Just a few other things to know. In the Middle East, there were street protests all over the Middle East. On Friday, tens of thousands people poured into the streets in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon after midday prayers to vent their anger over Israeli attacks. People trampled and burned American and Israeli flags all over the Middle East. There were shipping concerns. There were so many concerns because for, weeks or days in the Middle East, the Israeli airport was shut. I was supposed to have a meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Israel on the 26th. I couldn't go to Israel. My trip was canceled. Had to be postponed a few weeks. Major oil producers were very, very concerned. Oil prices were adjusted. In Haifa, a church in Haifa was damaged by an Iranian missile. The Church of Our Lady, the House of Grace, their halfway house was significantly damaged by an Iranian missile. EU had talks with Iran. They had no breakthroughs. The shipping giant Maersk cut their ties with companies that were operating with Israeli settlements. This was huge. This was a huge, huge win for pro-Palestinian activists. There was also very big news in the U.S. I'm going to go a few minutes over today. There was very big news in the Supreme Court on Friday. Families of victims of terror attacks in Israel can sue the Palestinian Authority in the United States. So, if American citizens were killed in bombings, they can sue the Palestinian Authority in the U.S. This went to the Supreme Court. So the American courts are adjudicating Americans who were killed in Israel. Now, what I want to know is, Shireen Abu Akleh, an American citizen, was killed by the government of Israel. They've not denied it. Can the government of Israel be sued in American courts? That's my question. So I'd encourage you to look that up. That was a huge, huge decision that just happened on Friday. So Ron Mamdani sent shockwaves through the political establishment, won the primary for the Democrats in the mayoral election in New York. 11 Iranian nationals with either criminal records or suspected terrorist links residing in the U.S. illegally were arrested over the weekend. The House introduced, I think they introduced it, they were supposed to, a war powers resolution. I don't have an update on that. I talked about this a little bit. I don't have time to go into great detail. There was a Middle East Monitor report that cited a researcher, Yaakov Garb, who published on Harvard's Dataverse about the missing 377,000 Palestinians in Gaza. He did a population analysis, and that is the number of people who are unaccounted for, who can't be found in the humanitarian centers. I gave a lot of detail about that during one of the daily updates this past week. Mahmoud Khalil, who was arrested for his activism for Palestinians, was released on bail because of a federal district court in Newark's decision. And in closing, Pope Leo the 14th expressed his closeness with Christians in the Middle East and called once again for paths of diplomacy and dialogue to be chosen. He said he stands in solidarity with Christians in the Middle East. He wanted to highlight the deep fragility in Syria after years of instability and violence, and calls on the international community to not turn your gaze away, but rather to offer support through acts of solidarity and renewed commitments to peace and reconciliation. So I'll end there. I apologize for being in such a disarray today. I can stay for just a few minutes. I apologize, I went long as well. But if there are any questions, may God go before us in the name of Christ.